pituitary gland. The pituitary gland and the hypothalamus have a pretty intimate connection. Half of the damn thing is an extension from the hypothalamus. The posterior pituitary gland is just a outgrowth of the hypothalamus that extends down. So really it's not even, it's just an extension of tissue of the hypothalamus in the grand scheme of things. But we put it here with the pituitary gland, and we talk about it as the whole little dangly thing underneath that hypothalamus. We have that stalk, that infundibulum, which has a ton of neural connections and blood vessel connections that occur between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The fancy names are the adenohypothesis and the neurohypothesis, or the anterior and posterior pituitary. You can see there's a few different parts to the anterior pituitary. I do not care about them. All right. I don't care about the pars distalis, the pars tubularis, the pars intermedius. We got other fish to fry. Okay. But there is some significant anatomy that is in there with them. There are a couple major nuclei within the hypothalamus that do all the communicating with said pituitary gland. But again, it's this dude right here, this posterior pituitary, that just really is just a bunch of neural connections between the hypothalamus and its distant, long lost piece, the posterior pituitary. The book goes over all of the functionality of all of these various different hormones and their target tissue and their effects and how we can turn them off. And to be honest, I am not going to get into a whole heck of a lot of that. All right. What I will like you to know, I'll highlight. I'll tell you. So here are my hormones associated with the anterior pituitary gland. There's only two with the posterior pituitary. So you could probably remember those two and just tell yourself everybody else is the anterior. Growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and prolactin. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that you guys can probably figure out growth hormones involved with growth. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland, which is going to help to secrete T3 and T4. Adrenocorticotropic hormones are going to act on the adrenal gland. Follicle stimulating hormone helps develop follicles. And ovary is what you generally think of when you think of that, but it does also work with the testes as well, helping to make the sperm and the egg. Luteinizing hormone acts on reproductive organs as well. It's given a different name now in males. It's interstitial cell stimulating hormone. I'm not going to ask it. I didn't even put it on the damn exam. Okay, we'll just keep it as luteinizing hormone for everybody right now. Okay, and then prolactin, as you can kind of see, they're going and primarily involved with the development of breast tissue and milk. So here they are. Here's the adrenocorticotropic hormone. I mean, this is the name, it tells you, the adrenal cortex. Trophic just means in relationship to. In relationship to that hormone, or to cause an effect of that hormone. So this is going to stimulate the adrenal cortex, and really, we're going to see it's going to help to stimulate secretion of glucocorticoids, cortisol, which is going to help with mobilization of sugars, which is involved with the stress response. Okay. Thyroid stimulating hormone, I'm not a liar, stimulates secretion of the thyroid hormones. T3, T4 is what we usually talk about there. Growth hormone promotes growth. Well, what is that? Growth is the formation of structure, protein synthesis. Okay. Putting amino acids together to make proteins, to make structure. It also will cause lipolysis. Lipo means lipid. Lysis means to destroy, So here we're going to liberate our fat stores of triglycerides. Why would we do this? We need a whole buttload of energy when we're actively growing. And carbs is going to be that, but our fat stores are a great way to get a lot of that triglycerides to make an enormous amount of ATP, 120 ATP for 18 carbon length fatty acid chain. Follicle stimulating hormone, like I said, it's involved with making of the sex cells, has a little bit more of a huge effect on the development of the ovary and the egg within it. Prolactin, again, milk production is its big thing. Obviously, in males, not so much, but it's involved with growth of other tissues. There are some prolactin receptors with bone. There are some prolactin receptors with fat, skeletal muscle. So it is involved with a growth process. I believe there is some receptors for prolactin with the immune system as well. So it's involved with the bolstering an immune response. So there's a lot of other, and that's where other additional actions in other organs resides. I mean, it does a lot of really exotic things that you don't think of. Milk production is probably, if I was to ask it, would be the only question that I would ask of it. And again, luteinizing hormone, a heck of a lot more function in females than males, but it does help to stimulate testosterone production there as well. So how would we turn these off? I mean, if I said, how can I shut down luteinizing hormone? What's its function? Okay. Its function is to stimulate testosterone secretion, which helps to cause sperm to mature. So if I said to you, how could I stop luteinizing hormone from being secreted in a male? Because all of these are going to be basically negative feedback mechanisms here. You would say, well, testosterone levels start to get really high and boom, that'll send the response up to the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary gland, to stop releasing luteinizing hormone because my testosterone is high and sufficiently high. Okay. When testosterone levels start to drop down below the normal level, stimulates it, luteinizing hormone gets secreted, and my interstitial cells will start secreting more testosterone. Okay. So just understanding the principal action, you can figure out what's going to happen with how can I regulate this thing. At least I think you can. But maybe that's a little bit too far, but I think you can do that. Posterior pituitary gland, 2 hormones, not made here. All these dudes made, stored in the anterior. Posterior pituitary only stores. Okay? Posterior pituitary does not make. Hypothalamus makes. And it's packaged up in neurosecretory transportation vesicles, and we dump it down in the posterior pituitary gland. Pretty easy. The 2 hormones we have here are antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Okay. Oxytocin, milk letdown, childbirth. Obviously the uterus. Okay. But it also helps to stimulate milk letdown. It's that suckling response, right? That stimulates its release. Which is weird. Because none of the other hormones are really secreted by a mechanical type of event, right? Oxytocin, not a huge thing in males, may have a role in sperm motility, can have a slight effect. How much depends on the testosterone production by some of the interstitial cells. There's a lot of fascinating research that is out there with testosterone. Maybe I'll say some of that when we get down to the sex hormones. Antidiuretic hormone promotes the retention of water in the kidneys. You can see what it's also called, but just call it antidiuretic hormone. That's what I'll ask on the exam. Okay. I won't ask about vasopressin. It is produced within the hypothalamus, but it's specific. Okay. Because there's a lot of nuclei here within the hypothalamus. We'll talk about the suprachiasmatic nucleus here in a little bit. So there are some pretty important nuclei here. These are the two that produce antidiuretic and oxytocin. And generally, it's not, one may be a little bit more active than the other. So I'm just lumping them collectively because there is research out there to suggest that one may be a little bit more obvious than the other, and one doesn't do what we think it does. Let's just keep them both together right now. Okay, supraoptic nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus. These are both involved with producing ADH and OT. We transport these guys, ADH and OT, oxytocin, in this thing called the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. It is just a collection of axons. As you can kind of see there, these are neurosecretory cells. Okay? Right here, these are neural cells. Okay? And these are made and packaged up into vesicles and transported down. There, oxytocin that's mechanical, right? Sucking on that nipple. Prolactin is involved with the development of the breast tissue, making the milk. Placenta has some skin in the game as well. And then oxytocin helps with that letdown. That suckling response is what stimulates the release of that oxytocin. Antidiuretic hormone is also mechanical in its release. It's stimulated by an increase in blood osmolarity, which is going to be a direct response to the pressure changes that occur within the blood vessel, which is a mechanical. Whether there's too much stress or not enough stretch, okay, will affect antidiuretic hormone. We'll talk about antidiuretic hormone a lot when we start talking about what's going on in the cardiovascular system, okay, with blood pressure. But these are neuroendocrine reflexes. These are neural cells producing endocrine secretions. And as you can see, there is a very extensive vasculature network down there, and we just dump it into that blood, right? Not by a duct, just release it directly into it. To that question, yes. The hypothalamus probably should have been talked about first, but whatever. The hypothalamus is the master control. The hypothalamus is the master control gland of the entire endocrine system. It has stimulating and inhibiting hormones for every hormone in the pituitary gland. It will have corticotrophin releasing hormone, corticotrophin inhibiting hormone. We got it all. Okay. If it's a releasing hormone, it causes said hormone to be released. If it's inhibiting hormone, it inhibits. I don't really care about structure at all. Okay. CRH is one that is of note when it comes to stress in the adrenal glands. So that's one that you'll see again. I'm trying to think of things that usually get asked on an exam. I mean, kind of, this one here, these guys in purple, they're generally involved with stress, depending upon the length of time stress hangs out in you. Can cause some stimulating and inhibiting hormones to be released. Somatostatins are inhibitors of growth hormone. That's the most difficult one to remember because its name really is difficult. If you know that som is body, the body grows, that's how you can connect those dots, but that one's the only one that's not intuitive. The other ones are kind of intuitive, I think. And we'll see those with stress. Again, these are pretty much all negative feedback mechanisms, guys. Okay. I probably wouldn't ask you from a short answer standpoint to describe a negative feedback mechanism, because I assume you all know that by now. Oxytocin, when it comes to uterine contractions, would be positive feedback. Luteinizing hormone is a positive feedback when we get around ovulation. So there's a couple examples where it's not always the case, but the vast majority of these are all negative feedback inhibition. Okay, and there may be some negative feedback questions that I've asked on the exam. The book goes into a number of various different axes. I'm not going to ask anything about it. Pretty much with the hypothalamus, there's a hypothalamus axis with the pituitary, hypothalamic pituitary axis. It's just a connection between these two organs. We have one between the hypothalamus, the adrenal gland, and the pituitary. There are several of them. All it is indicating is that there is a lot of communication that occurs between these two glandular tissues. That's all that means, right? The hypothalamus has an axis with several of them, but it's the master control. So of course it's going to have its hand in the cookie jar for literally everybody. But it's negative feedback mechanisms. That's what I really want you to know. Okay. Thyroid levels rise. It inhibits thyroid releasing hormone, which causes the pituitary to not produce thyroid hormones. Negative feedback. Okay. Sex hormones rise up. It inhibits the anterior pituitary to produce less follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. It also goes and acts on the hypothalamus as well to diminish its release of gonadotrophin releasing hormones, which then affects the pituitary. So it diminishes. And we'll talk about this when we talk about the cycle of making a sperm and making an egg towards the end of the semester. The master control is the hypothalamus. But we have a number of other regions as well. The pineal gland is a huge one, and I saw a couple of errors in the notes, so I updated it yesterday. I had mid-thought, and I guess I stopped. I don't know. But your light and day rhythms, your night and day rhythms, the circadian rhythm, okay? There are a number of hormones that are peak secreted at different points of the day. Some at night, some during the day. Growth hormone is one of those that has a greater secretion when you are asleep than during the day. Emotions play a huge part in it. The sense of smell, the olfactory receptors there's a huge part with that. And I mean, we all know about all the anecdotal evidence with emotions and stress around menstrual time and how that can influence other people around them in close proximity, their cycles, and cause them to enter into a cycle a little bit sooner. There's like 26 brain regions that this book talks about. These are 26 brain regions found in mice. Mice is pretty similar to humans, which is why we do so much research on them. There are a couple others that we do as well, but mice. So this is where they're talking about. So there are a lot of different regions up in that cerebrum there they're going to have some involvement with regulating this release of various different hormones. And a lot of it has to do with emotions, with the limbic system, okay? Which can affect the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal gland, pineal gland, all these things. And it's crazy how one can snowball into several others and affect. And when we start looking at stress here, we'll see a little bit of that. We won't get in, I'll do a deep dive, but we'll get into the 3 different stages of stress. 4, I guess, if you want to split hairs with one of them. But there are 3 major steps when it comes to stress and our ability to handle that. Okay. And some of it has to do with the limbic system and all of these various different brain regions up in the cerebrum that are involved in its control.